I never expected a phone left on speaker during a quiet drive to change the way I saw my entire marriage. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon in early spring, when the Arkansas hills were just starting to turn green again. My husband and I had thrown a few bags in the back of the SUV on Sunday night with almost no planning. We needed to get away from the city for a while. Work had been heavy for both of us, and I had been carrying something private that I was not ready to share with anyone outside our little circle. The idea of a cabin in the Ozark Mountains felt like the only thing that might give us room to breathe. We were already on the road, about 2 hours into the drive, when the phone incident happened. Ethan had his cell resting on the center console. He had been using the speaker for directions earlier, and he must have forgotten to turn it off. The screen lit up with his mother's name. Before I could say anything, he answered without thinking. "Ethan, honey, I just got off the phone with the girls from the club." My mother-in-law's voice filled the car clear and bright, the way it always sounded when she was sharing news she thought was helpful. I told them about what Brooke has been going through with that work situation. They were so concerned. I said we were all praying for her to find her footing again. You know how people talk if they do not have the full picture. The car went very still. Ethan's hands tightened on the wheel. I turned my head slowly and looked at him. He did not look surprised. He looked caught. I reached over and tapped the screen to end the call before she could say anything else. The silence that followed felt heavier than the hills outside the window. "You told her," I said. My voice came out quieter than I expected, but steady. "I asked you not to tell anyone. That project falling apart was mine to carry. I did not want your mother's friends knowing the details." Ethan kept his eyes on the road. "She was worried about you. She said she could feel something was off the last time we visited. I thought if I gave her a little context, she would stop asking so many questions." I watched the trees slide past. We had been married for 6 years. In all that time, I had tried to be careful with his family. I knew my mother-in-law liked to manage things. She liked to be the one people turned to when there was a problem. I had never fought it out loud. I had just kept my private struggles closer to my chest. She did not need context, I said. She needed to respect that some things stay between us. He was quiet for a long minute. Then he said, "She is trying to help. She always has. When we needed the deposit for the apartment after we got married, she stepped in. When your car needed work last year, she sent the check without asking. You know how she is with money. She sees it as taking care of family." I felt the old familiar ache start behind my ribs. The generosity was never just money. It always came with a story she could tell other people. It always came with a version of me that needed fixing. We drove the rest of the way without saying much. The road wound higher into the Ozarks, the air growing cooler as we climbed. By the time we reached the turnoff for the cabin, the sun was low, and the shadows were long. The cabin itself sat at the end of a gravel drive tucked between tall pines with a small porch that looked out over a valley. It was simple and quiet, exactly what we had hoped for. Vivian had arranged the rental. She had insisted on paying for the week because she said we both needed the rest. I had agreed because I was tired of arguing about money with her. Ethan carried the bags inside while I stood on the porch for a moment, breathing in the pine and damp earth smell. The cabin was clean and smelled faintly of cedar. There was a stone fireplace, a small kitchen with old appliances, and 2 bedrooms down a short hall. It felt like a place where people came to hide from the world for a little while. We unpacked in silence. I put our groceries away and started a pot of coffee, even though it was late afternoon. Ethan sat at the small wooden table and scrolled on his phone. I could feel the weight of the call still sitting between us. Later that evening, after we had eaten a simple dinner of pasta and salad, Ethan went to take a shower. I stayed at the table with my laptop open, trying to answer a few work emails that had followed me even here. His laptop was also on the table. He had left it open when he went to the bathroom. The screen had gone dark, but when I bumped the table with my elbow, it woke up. I was not trying to snoop. I really was not. But The email inbox was right there, and one thread caught my eye because it had my name in the subject line. It was from Vivian to a group of 6 or 7 women. The most recent message was from that afternoon. I should not have clicked it. I know that. But once I saw the preview line, Brooke's recent struggles and how we can support her, I could not look away. The thread went back 3 weeks. Vivian had written to her friends about the project at my job that had not gone the way I hoped. She had described it as a real setback for her confidence. She had told them I was taking some time to regroup and that Ethan was being so patient with her. She had asked the group if any of them knew a good counselor in our area, because sometimes these things need professional eyes. One of the women had replied with a name and a story about her own daughter-in-law who had gone through something similar. There were no lies in the emails exactly. The facts were there, but the way she framed them made me sound fragile and dependent. It made Ethan sound like the steady one holding everything together. It made her sound like the caring mother-in-law who was quietly managing the situation. I closed the laptop before Ethan came back. My hands felt cold. I sat there for a long time listening to the shower run and the wind move through the pines outside. I had spent years trying to keep certain parts of my life private from his family. I had never wanted to be the topic of anyone's prayer chain or bridge club conversation. And now I knew she had been sharing my business for weeks while smiling at me over Sunday dinners and offering to help with things I had never asked for. When Ethan came out of the bathroom, he looked relaxed for the first time all day. He sat across from me and reached for my hand. "This place is perfect," he said. "No noise, no emails, just us." I looked at him. I thought about the phone on speaker and the email thread and the way he had defended her in the car. I thought about all the times I had stayed quiet because I did not want to make things harder for him with his mother. I squeezed his hand gently and let it go. "I think we need to talk about some things while we are here," I said. My voice was calm. It always stayed calm when the hurt was deepest. "Not tonight, but soon." He nodded, but I could see he was hoping the conversation could wait. He had always been good at hoping difficult things would soften on their own. That night, I lay awake in the cabin bedroom, listening to the unfamiliar quiet of the mountains. Ethan slept beside me. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like someone turning pages in an old book. I kept thinking about the email thread and the version of me Vivian had been sending to her friends. I kept thinking about how generosity can be used like a spotlight that only shows what someone else wants seen. I did not sleep much. In the morning, I made coffee and sat on the porch while the sun came up over the valley. The air was cool and clean. For the first time in a long time, I felt something shift inside me. It was not anger exactly. It was a quiet, steady decision forming. I was not going to disappear into the story she was writing for me. The next morning, I woke before the sun finished rising over the valley. The cabin was still and cool, the kind of quiet that makes every small sound feel loud. I made coffee in the old percolator and carried a mug out to the porch again. The pine trees smelled sharp and clean. For a little while, I let myself pretend we had come here only for rest. Then Ethan's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter where he had left it charging. The screen lit up with my mother-in-law's name again. I did not answer it. I let it ring until it stopped. A moment later, a text appeared. "Just checking in on you two. Call me when you wake up. I have some thoughts about how we can get Brooke the support she needs." I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down and went back outside. The decision I had felt forming the night before was still there, quiet but solid. I was not going to let her write the version of me that made it easiest for everyone else to sleep at night. Ethan came out a little later, hair still damp from the shower. He kissed the top of my head the way he always did when he wanted things to feel normal. "Sleep, okay?" he asked. I nodded. "The air is different here. Cleaner." He sat in the chair beside me and looked out at the valley. For a few minutes we drank our coffee without talking. Then he said, "She means well. You know that, right? She has always stepped in when people needed her. That is just how she was raised." I turned the mug in my hands. The ceramic was warm against my palms. She stepped in by telling her bridge club about my work situation, I said. She framed it like I was falling apart and you were the one holding me up. That is not stepping in. That is rewriting what happened so it fits the story she wants to tell. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. A bird called from somewhere in the trees. He finally said, "She worries. When she worries, she talks to the people she trusts. It is not malicious. It does not have to be malicious to be harmful," I answered. My voice stayed even. "I asked you not to share that with her. You did anyway." Then she turned it into something she could pass around like a casserole recipe. He looked down at his hands. I could see the old habit of protecting her rising in him. It had always been there, even before we were married. His mother had been the one who kept the family story straight when his father died young. She had been the one who made sure everyone knew they were still the kind of people who handled things with grace. I had respected that once. I had tried not to make waves, but respect and silence are not the same thing. After breakfast, we decided to walk the short trail behind the cabin. The owner had left a note about a small waterfall, a half-mile in. The path was narrow and soft, with last year's pine needles. We walked without saying much. Ethan pointed out a deer track once. I nodded. The air felt thinner the higher we climbed, or maybe that was just the space opening up between us. When we came back, the cabin felt smaller than it had that morning. Ethan went to lie down for a while. I stayed in the main room and opened my laptop. I needed to hear a voice that was not inside this story. I called Taylor. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm and a little surprised. "Brooke, I thought you two were off the grid." "We were supposed to be," I said. I told her about the drive the phone on speaker and the email thread I had seen. I did not raise my voice. I just laid the facts out, the way I would lay out a work report. Taylor listened without interrupting. When I finished, she let out a slow breath. "That is not okay. You know that, right? Even if she thinks she is helping sharing your private business with her friends without your permission is a violation." And Ethan knew and did not stop it. "I know," I said. "I am trying to figure out what I do with that knowledge while we are stuck here for the week." Taylor was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You do not have to decide everything today. But you also do not have to keep pretending it is fine just because she paid for the cabin. Money is not a license to rewrite someone else's life." We talked a little longer about small things. The kind of talk that reminds you there is still a world outside the one you are trapped in. When we hung up, I felt steadier. I closed the laptop and looked around the room. The cabin had the feel of a place that had been used by many families over the years. There were faint scuff marks on the floorboards and a small bookshelf in the corner, filled with old paperbacks and a few board games. While Ethan slept, I started to tidy up a little. I opened a low cabinet near the fireplace, looking for extra blankets. Instead, I found a wooden box with a latch. Inside were old photo albums, the kind with sticky pages and plastic sleeves that had yellowed over time. I pulled one out without really thinking. It felt like something left behind by previous guests, the kind of thing people forget when they pack up and go home. I sat on the floor and opened it. Most of the photos were of families I did not know, children in swimsuits by a lake, older couples on the porch. Then near the back, I found a small stack that had been slid between the pages instead of into the sleeves. They were older, black and white, with scalloped edges. One showed a young woman in a white dress standing next to a man in a suit. The woman looked like Vivian, only 20 years younger and thinner. The man had Ethan's jawline. I turned the photo over. On the back, in faded blue ink, someone had written in a careful hand, "This is the story we agreed to tell. The rest stays between us. Do not ever let the next generation know how close we came to losing everything. The appearance of success is what keeps the family together." I read it twice. My chest felt tight in a way that had nothing to do with the altitude. I flipped through the rest of the loose photos. There was one of a much younger Vivian holding a baby I assumed was Ethan. On the back of that one, the same handwriting said, "He will never remember the lean years." That is the gift we give our children. I closed the album and put it back in the box. My hands were steady, but something inside me had shifted again. The generosity, the constant offering of help, the way she shaped every story so that she was the steady center, and everyone else was either grateful or in need of her guidance. It was not just about me. It was about keeping a version of the family alive that had never been entirely true. Ethan woke a little later. He came into the main room, rubbing his eyes, and saw me sitting near the cabinet. "Find anything interesting?" he asked. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said, "I found some old photos. One of them had a note on the back. It was about keeping up appearances even when things were falling apart." He went still. "What kind of note?" I did not answer right away. I stood and walked to the kitchen to pour myself another cup of coffee that had gone cold. When I turned back, he was watching me with the careful expression he wore when he was bracing for something he did not want to hear. "I think we need to talk about more than just the email thread," I said. "I think there are things your mother has been protecting for a long time, and I think she has been using the same tools on me that she used to keep that protection in place." Ethan sat down at the table. He did not reach for my hand this time. "She has always done what she thought was necessary," he said quietly. "After my father died, she had to hold everything together alone. People expected a certain image from her. She learned to give them that image so we would not lose what little we had left." I nodded. I understood the instinct. I even understood the fear underneath it. What I did not understand was why that same instinct had to be turned on me. "She does not get to decide what version of my life gets shared with her friends," I said. "And she does not get to decide what version of your family history I am allowed to know. Not anymore." He looked out the window toward the valley. The light was starting to fade again. Another day, almost gone. "She is coming up tomorrow," he said after a moment. "She texted while I was sleeping. She said she does not like the idea of us being out here alone when you are still fragile. She wants to bring groceries and maybe stay a night or two so she can help." I felt the decision settle deeper inside me. It was not loud. It did not feel like victory. It felt like the ground under my feet becoming more solid. "Then we have tonight to decide what we are going to do when she gets here," I said. Ethan did not answer. He just kept looking out the window like the valley might offer him an easier path than the one sitting at the table with him. I carried my cold coffee to the sink and poured it out. Outside, the wind had picked up again, moving through the pines with the same steady sound as pages turning in a book that had been read too many times. I thought about the note on the back of the photograph and the email thread, and the way generosity can be turned into a kind of ownership if you let it. I was not going to let it own me anymore. But I also knew that choosing myself might mean losing the only version of family I had ever been given. The thought did not make me want to fight harder. It made me want to be very still and very clear about where my own story ended and someone else's began. The next morning, Vivian arrived just after 9, her car crunching over the gravel drive like it belonged there. She carried 2 paper bags of groceries and a small bouquet of grocery store flowers wrapped in cellophane. Her smile was bright and practiced when Ethan opened the door. "I brought a few things to make the week easier," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "And these are for you, Brooke. I know how hard it can be to keep your spirits up when you are going through something." I took the flowers because refusing them would have given her another story to tell. The cabin suddenly felt smaller with her in it. She moved through the kitchen like she was the one who had chosen the rental, putting away milk and bread and a container of soup she had made just in case. Ethan watched her with the same careful expression he had worn the night before. I could see the old loyalty pulling at him. Vivian kept talking, her voice warm and reasonable, about how families take care of each other, and how sometimes people need a little extra support, even when they do not ask for it out loud. After she had finished putting the groceries away, she sat at the table and looked at me with genuine-looking concern. "Ethan told me you found some old photos," she said. "I hope they did not upset you. Old things can bring up strange feelings when you are already carrying so much." I sat across from her. My hands were folded on the table. I kept my voice calm, and even the way I had learned to speak in difficult meetings at work. "I read the note on the back of one of them," I said. "The one about keeping up appearances, even when things were falling apart. It made me think about the email thread you sent to your friends about my work situation." Vivian's smile did not disappear, but it changed. It became the smile she used when someone had stepped outside the lines she had drawn. "I only wanted them to understand what you were facing," she said. "People pray better when they know the real story." I did not say anything that was not true. "You said I was fragile," I answered. "You said Ethan was being patient with me. You made it sound like my life was something that needed managing. That was not your story to tell." She reached across the table and patted my hand. The gesture was gentle and controlling at the same time. "Brooke, sweetheart, you have been under so much pressure. Sometimes, when we are in the middle of it, we cannot see how much we need the people who love us. I was only trying to make sure you did not have to carry it alone." Ethan had been standing near the counter. He moved to the chair beside his mother. "She was worried about you," he said quietly. "We both were." I looked at him. The hurt was still there underneath everything, but it no longer felt like something I had to hide or soften for his sake. "You were worried enough to tell her something I asked you to keep between us," I said, "and she was worried enough to turn it into conversation for her club. That is not worry. That is control, dressed up as care." Vivian's hand stilled on the table. For the first time since she arrived, the bright, helpful tone slipped. "I have spent my whole life making sure this family did not fall apart," she said. Her voice was lower now, less polished. "After Robert died, I had nothing but the story that we were still the kind of people who handled things with dignity. I protected that story for Ethan. I protected it for you. And now you are sitting here acting like I am the one who has done something wrong." The name Robert hung in the air. Ethan's father. The man in the old photograph. I thought about the note on the back and the way Vivian had written that the appearance of success was what kept the family together. "You protected a story," I said, "not the people in it. There is a difference." She stood up. The chair scraped against the floor. "I do not have to listen to this," she said. "I came here to help. If you are going to twist everything I do into something ugly, then maybe it is better if I leave." She gathered her purse and the keys. At the door, she turned back once. "Ethan, when you are ready to talk without all of this drama, you know where to find me." The door closed behind her. The cabin felt quieter than it had all week, but the quiet was not peaceful yet. It was the quiet that comes after something has been said out loud for the first time. Ethan sat back down at the table. He looked older than he had when we arrived. "She is not going to change," he said after a while. "She has been holding the family together this way since I was a kid. It is the only way she knows how to love us." I nodded. I believed him. I also knew that believing him did not mean I had to keep participating in the same pattern. "I am not asking her to change," I said. "I am deciding what I will and will not accept anymore. That is different." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said something I had not expected. "I knew she was telling people more than I should have let her. Not just about your work, about other things too. She would call me, and I would fill in the blanks, because it was easier than arguing with her. I told myself it was harmless, because she always said it was out of love." The final piece of the picture clicked into place, not with anger, with a kind of tired clarity. "You chose the story over me," I said. It was not an accusation. It was a fact we were both looking at now. He did not deny it. He just sat there with his hands flat on the table, like he was trying to keep something from sliding away. I stood and walked to the window. The valley was still beautiful. The pines moved in the wind, the same way they had the first morning. Nothing outside had changed. Everything inside had. I am going to stay the rest of the week, I said, but I am not going to talk about my work or my health or anything private with her again, and I am not going to pretend that the version of our life she tells other people is the one I agreed to live. Ethan nodded slowly. What does that mean for us? I turned back to him. The answer was already formed, quiet and certain. It means I need space to figure out who I am when I am not being managed for the sake of someone else's story. I love you. That has not changed, but I will not disappear so that the family narrative stays comfortable. He did not argue. He looked relieved and sad at the same time, the way people look when they have been carrying something heavy for so long they forgot what it felt like to put it down. The rest of the week passed in a strange, suspended way. Vivian did not come back. She called Ethan twice. He answered once and kept the conversation short. I called Taylor every evening and told her what had happened. She listened without trying to fix it. On Thursday, I called Samuel Grant, the attorney Taylor had recommended months earlier when I had mentioned wanting to understand my options around shared finances and privacy. I did not need legal action. I needed to hear from someone outside the story that protecting my own boundaries was not the same as being difficult. He was calm and direct. He told me that documenting the pattern of sharing private information was something I could do for my own peace of mind, even if I never used it. He also said that choosing distance was a valid boundary, even when the other person believed their intentions were good. I thanked him and hung up, feeling lighter than I had in months. On the last morning, we packed the car in the same quiet we had driven in with. Ethan carried the bags. I stood on the porch one more time and looked at the valley. The cabin would be cleaned and rented to someone else soon. The old photo album would probably stay in the cabinet for the next people to find or ignore. The note on the back of the photograph would remain unread by anyone who did not already know the cost of keeping a story alive. We drove back down the mountain without the radio on. Halfway home, Ethan reached over and took my hand. I let him hold it. I did not pull away, but I also did not pretend the space between us had closed. When we reached our apartment, I unpacked my own bag first. Then I went into the spare room we sometimes used as an office and closed the door. I sat on the floor with my back against the wall and let myself feel the full weight of what I had chosen. I had lost the version of family I had been trying to protect for years. The shared stories, the Sunday dinners that felt like obligation disguised as love. The sense that if I just stayed quiet and grateful, the fractures would not show. Those things were gone. In their place was a quieter, smaller life that belonged only to me. It did not feel like victory. It felt like finally being able to breathe without someone else deciding what my breath should sound like. In the weeks that followed, I muted Vivian's number on my phone. I did not block her completely because I was not trying to punish her. I was trying to stop participating in the exchange where her version of me was the only one allowed to exist. Ethan and I went to counseling together for a while. Some sessions were hard, some were quiet. He began to see that protecting his mother's story had cost him the ability to stand beside mine. I began to see that I could love him and still refuse to vanish inside the family he came from. I started seeing Dr. Patricia Rowe twice a month. She did not try to fix my relationship with my mother-in-law. She helped me understand why I had spent so long believing that being easy to manage was the same as being loved. Taylor remained the steady voice on the other end of the phone when the old loneliness tried to convince me that setting boundaries meant I had failed at family. One evening, months later, Ethan came home from work and found me at the kitchen table with a small stack of printed emails. They were the thread Vivian had sent about me. I had asked him for copies so I could keep my own record. He sat down across from me and looked at them without touching the papers. "I am sorry," he said. "Not just for what she did, for the part I played in letting it happen." I nodded. The apology did not erase anything, but it was real. That was enough for now. "I am not going back to the way things were," I told him. "I will be polite when we have to see her. I will not make scenes, but I will not share anything private with her again, and I will not pretend her concern is harmless when it costs me pieces of myself." He reached across the table and touched the edge of one of the printed emails. "I know," he said. "We did not talk about the cabin again. We did not talk about the old photograph or the note on the back. Some losses are not meant to be repaired. They are meant to be acknowledged and then set down so they stop taking up space in the life you are trying to build." I still think about the Ozark Mountains sometimes. I think about the way the wind moved through the pines like pages turning. I think about the version of me that arrived there tired and unsure, and the version that left knowing she would rather be alone in the truth than surrounded by a story that required her to disappear. Real family never makes you disappear. Sometimes the people who claim that title the loudest are the ones most invested in keeping you small enough to fit inside the narrative they need. Choosing yourself does not always look like victory. Sometimes it looks like a quiet drive home, a muted phone number, and the slow, steady work of building a life that no longer requires permission to exist. I am still learning how to live inside that quieter life. Some days it feels lonely. Most days it feels like peace I did not know I was allowed to claim. Thank you for listening to my story. If this story stayed with you, I would love to hear what boundaries you have had to set with the people who claim to love you. Take care of yourselves out there.